Headline is this: 26% of American Muslims under 30 feel that suicide bombings against civilians are sometimes justified. That basically means that 1/4 of American Muslims under 30 are okay with the idea of targeting innocent people to defend Islam. 26%, mind you, adds up to 280,000 people living right here. If you add the folks in who answered, "I don't know," or they wouldn't answer, to that number, it spikes up to about 500,000 Americans. Can you imagine after Oklahoma City, if a poll came out in which said 1/4 of white Americans think it's okay to blow up federal buildings? I believe the headline would be different in USA Today. It would constitute a national crisis of epic proportions. And guess what? So does this, or at least it should. I feel, honestly, a little like Al Gore here, but let's move on to some other interesting charts and graphs from the poll. Another number that jumped out to me was this: 47% of Muslims think of themselves as Muslim first, as opposed to 28% who think of themselves as American. By comparison, 47% of Christians think of themselves as American first. Now, these are the facts. What does it mean? Well, it means if you are a Muslim first Muslim, you are 3 times more likely to think suicide bombing is justified, and less than half as likely to believe that Arabs carried out 9/11. Quick side note, only 40% of American Muslims believe Arabs were responsible for 9/11. Now, here's the final poll that I think is one of the most jarring of all of them. 7% of U.S. Muslims aged 18 to 29 have a favorable opinion of Al-Qaeda. That's scary enough. But what's even more frightening is the fact that 29%, or 630,000 Muslims, didn't know or refused to answer. Really? It seems kind of simple to me if you want to answer. I mean, if we're talking about stem cell research, I'll accept I don't know. I haven't been able to figure that out. But if you're a Muslim living here after 9/11, you haven't taken the time to noodle Al-Qaeda yet? Here's what I know tonight. I know that most Muslims reject violence, and they are our greatest ally here in America. The poll will tell you that Muslim Americans actually have a more hopeful, optimistic belief in the future of America and their future in America than people like me, than most of the U.S. population that is not Muslim. However, there is still a sizable portion of Muslims here in America who either accept or even condone violence against us. This poll will not truly be good news until that number is a lot closer to 0. Here's what I don't know. How long will it be until one of these people who support Al-Qaeda commits an act of terror against innocent civilians? It's no longer a question of if, but a question of when. Joining me now is Nani Darwish. She is the author of Now They Call Me Infidel: Why I Renounced Jihad for America, Israel, and the War on Terror. And Zuhdi Jasser. He is of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and a frequent contributor to this program, and also a Muslim American. Zuhdi, let me start with you. Let's go back to the Al-Qaeda question. 29% of Muslims in this survey say they have no view on Al-Qaeda, or they refuse to answer. What does that tell you as a member of the Muslim community?
It tells me about the lack of leadership. It tells me about the lack of moral courage, in that when we ask Muslims, you know, they're in denial. They say they condemn terrorism, but they've never condemned the organizations by name. They've never condemned the ends. And what this study should be telling America is certainly there's hope, because the majority of Muslims are where our organization is. But the issue is they need to be pushed and prodded to be more clear about condemning the ends, and that's how we defeat the means.
Okay.
The study here, this is about political Islam, Glenn.
Okay,
Clear and simple.
2 things. First of all, Zuhdi, I have interpreted these numbers, where they're high numbers on don't know or refuse to answer, as quite possibly fear of the government tapping your phones and then you're on record saying you support Al-Qaeda, or fear of you don't know who's in your neighborhood. It's like going to, Worcester Street in New Haven and saying, do you believe in the mob? I'd rather not answer right now. Is it possible that either of those options are why the high numbers on don't know or refuse to answer in this poll?
Oh, I'm sure that's part of it. I mean, you have to remember, my parents, for example, and most of our families, this showed that most Muslims are immigrants, escaped a societies that were just despotic. They've always been afraid of the government, and their baggage comes with them. But we have to start understanding as a community that the only way to defeat this is to get back the moral courage of Islam, to declare that the Islamists are our enemies, and that we are Americans first and Muslims second, because our faith will never be questioned between us and God personally, but what gives us our freedom to be Muslims is our country.
Okay.
And that's where we start to have to fight this ideology.
Nani, I've seen this, what he was just talking about, I've seen this in the poll. The people who move in and are not born here, they're actually more positive, and they're much more likely to condemn political Islam. They're much more likely to condemn Al-Qaeda, suicide bombings, etc., than those who are living here. What I want to understand from you, because you're somebody who has studied suicide bombing for a very long time, you see these numbers. What are the trigger points to make these people who are saying, 26% under 30, that sometimes, even if it's rarely, suicide bombing is justified? What's a trigger point for them to move from there to actually doing it?
Well, in time of crisis, a lot of these people can do acts of terrorism at the individual level. They don't have to belong to Al-Qaeda, but we have seen several acts of terrorism by individuals in the United States. But we still treat it as a police matter. They are inspired, unfortunately, by Islamic leadership who glorify suicide bombing.
Well, let me ask you both this question. Help me out. Who is the Islamic leadership that is inspiring this? Where are these people, and how come we never hear about them anywhere?
Al-Azhar leader, the leader of Al-Azhar University, which is the oldest Islamic university in Cairo, did announce that terrorism under certain conditions against civilians is justifiable.
Now, but Zuhdi, help me out here in America. Do you see this? Do you see this radical view of Islam here in America? If you were just going to another city and you went into a mosque, is this the kind of teaching that you would expect to hear?
No. I mean, that type of violent, militant radicalism I've never seen it in my life. I've been active in the Muslim community my entire life. Militancy, I just don't see in America. And this study actually showed that. But the issue is what you do see is glorification of political Islam, blaming America for everything, conspiracy theories about the Zionists and the West. And what happens is even if it's nonviolent, that is the seed that then, when planted in a young, impressionable, hateful mind, then becomes the fuse that lights them to become radical.
Nani, help me out, because this is my understanding of what the problem is, and I don't think most people understand this, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't think the problem is Islam. The problem is political Islam. It has been turned into this, there is no separation of mosque and state. Am I wrong on that? That's where the trouble gets in, is when politics and religion combine?
Absolutely. And those impressionable young Muslims do watch satellite dishes from the Arab world who are using political Islam all the time against the West. They watch Al Jazeera, all these Arab channels. They watch very radical Muslim leaders in the Middle East, and they regard them as their heroes. There is no separation of church and state.
Okay.
And many of them aspire, their dream is to see Islam conquer the world.
Let me go back to Zuhdi. One last question for you. Overall, U.S. Muslims' view on Al-Qaeda, 58% very unfavorable. If you break that out, though, if you look at native-born black Muslims, only 36% have an unfavorable view. We're seeing that those people who are coming in from across the sea have a much different view of Islam than those here. They're much more likely, if you're a foreigner, to believe, it's like you're escaping. Am I wrong?
You're right, and that they know what the danger and the radicalism of how it controls society, how much theocracy is a disaster. They're coming to a pluralistic society to be more free Muslims.
Right.
So the issue is we need to start having this debate, because what's happening is you have incubators of ideology that is run by Wahhabists that are actually radical, and you're not allowing the opening of an Islamic mind.
Nani Zuhdi, thank you very much. Coming up, the White House declassifies information saying that Osama bin Laden